Hello there, everybody, and welcome to another Transformers TCG meta-analysis. Anthony joining you once again, and today we are going to be looking at the OI meta, or rather the meta of the game after the OI, I should specify. But unlike the pre-OI meta-analysis, I am not going to be doing this alone. I have Bill and Naga here with me. Gentlemen, it's good to have you on board for this, so that way I ain't just spewing hot takes out of my ass.
Good to be here, yeah.
Moo!
Albeit the last time I tried to spew hot takes out of my ass, Naga, you actually said that I was right on all of them, and I turned out actually to be right on most of them, which is a little weird.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, we've got some new things to talk about. Now, it's been a few weeks since the OI has concluded. Of course, Bretasaurus took the top spot in that event with Galaxy Prime. Ozzy took second with Metaplex, and there was a whole lot of stuff floating around during the event. But we will get to all of that. And I think we should actually start with that point, that there really isn't a clear top dog in this format necessarily. Like, even in matches we know the result of, there was still opportunities for games to be won by the deck that ended up losing depending on certain draws. And like, I explored that a little bit in a video a couple weeks ago where I threw Ozzy's Metaplex list against my Devastator list for fun, and while there was a significant oversight in that video, it still showed, like, there was definitely parity in matches that ended up going a specific way. And if you look at the overall deck diversity of it, there were 14 different decks being played, and I have a graphic thrown up on screen to show this. And if you count all three Cars decks as kind of one category, there were still 12 different decks that were seen among the 16 players in the OI metagame. So, really, what exactly does this mean kind of on a general sense?
Not gonna let you go.
Oh, let me go. Sorry.
Don't worry, jump cut editing is a thing.
That's alright. I think it was actually pretty interesting. I feel like lots of decisions were made based on the one thing that a lot of people feared, which was Devastator.
Yep,
and there was only
that. Yep. So
yeah, we will.
Yep.
But yeah, it was very diverse. There was two Fort Max, two Devastator. Then everything else was basically unique in itself.
Right. Even amongst the Cars decks, there were 3 different versions of that. So the only things we saw duplicates of, like you said, were Fort Max and Devi.
Yeah, exactly. And to be completely honest, I mean, if people want to go and say, oh, look, another major tournament won by Galaxy Prime, the decks are completely different, especially with the inclusion of BFA and drop Phase 1 of Monster Menagerie in here. The deck principle is still the same, but like some of the packages were removed. Like, you'd be surprised if we ever go deeper into Brett's deck, because there's no ranged package, so it was basically a different Galaxy Prime that was played as well.
Right, and actually that's something I do want to touch on here in a little bit, but Bill, do you have anything to say on the meta diversity?
I mean, from a game marketer / game director perspective, it's very attractive, I think, to see a meta that's that diverse for so-called the biggest event of the year for the Allied crossplay scene. Obviously, any new player is going to be looking at the meta as defined by this event, and they're going to go, "Wow, those are a lot. I recognize a lot of those cards." There's a lot of cards in there that I had in my collection that I was pulling out to play when Hasbro and Wizards are still doing their thing with the game, and before all this, community stuff happened. So I think that from that perspective, it's very attractive, basically to all parties. The promise is there for a new player to come in and use a lot of those old cards, because they're sort of doing that scan. They're doing that quick scan of like, oh, characters on the character team is doing really well. It's Galaxy Prime, it's Devastator. I never imagined Devastator would be good, but I guess they're good now. And Metaplex, Fort Max. These are all very familiar names, and I think from purely that perspective, it's very good for us and for the game in general to see all these familiar names.
Right, I mean, if you look at the overall breakdown of the decks, again, 2 of them or really only 2 of them were, possibly 3 were enabled by fan set cards. You have the Mega Ratchet deck that Vangelist was running, and then the Gilthor deck that I believe it was Dave that was running, and you could also argue that the Blue Tanks deck that I believe it was who was running that Blue Tanks deck?
Yeah, it was Mr. X.
Right, so that deck was enabled by the printing of Bonsai-tron, so, like, there are a couple decks floating around that are enabled by the newer sets, but, again, like you said, the majority of decks are just existing cards that pretty much everybody who played the game during the Wizard era will recognize.
Right, and there is a flip side to that. I don't think either side is good or bad necessarily. I think they're actually both good, because it just means that, well, I think the flip side is that the meta is not very mature yet, even after a season. I think that a lot of the, I would say a lot of the title changes that have happened in Allied Crossplay, as far as like some cards being put into ban lists, some new cards emerging, such as Phase 1 and Monster Menagerie making a difference, making their impact known in the meta. Of course, that's always going to be the case in any given season. There's going to be releases that affect the meta. Mm-hmm. But I do think that I would say the diversity of the meta, not only is it attractive from the sense of trying to market the game to new players, bringing players, bringing them back in. I think it's also a symptom of the meta just not being terribly mature yet. And I think that even as new releases come in, even over time, I think we will see a maturing of the meta where things will start drawing towards, I would say, very seasoned archetypes. I think that's even with the sort of the heavy hand of format organizers, wanting to sort of guide the game in a sense away from like very I would say the potential of like really oppressive archetypes. I think there's a difference between an oppressive archetype and one that's like very seasoned and very well known. Right. So like cars have sort of inhabited that space for a really long time, where they've been strong. They've been strong since Wave 1, but they've never been so powerful that people have like banned cards like turbo boosters or anything, or starter engines. For the most part, cars have existed in this meta stability, which has always been seasonally strong. I think we still need to see that in Allied Crossplay, and I think that's perfectly understandable. Even though we've been around for over a year, I think the meta itself really has had much less time to mature, and I think that we're going to see. I would be surprised to see exactly. There might be that level of complexity and diversity in the next OI, but I would be really surprised if I didn't see like some archetype emerge from the OI listings this year that just matures and grows and people sort of latch onto, and it becomes a bit of a I would say a more durable archetype over time.
Right, and also to add to your point, maybe another thing with like the like archetypes becoming like stabilized and mature, like another thing that could play a factor in that is the number of eyes on it. Like, let's be honest with ourselves, we're in a fairly small operation and a fairly small community right now, but as that player base grows, there are going to be more eyes on these different archetypes, and different people are going to pick up on different things, and as a result, those things are going to advance a little bit quicker. Plus, going back to the point about there not being like a top dog, like having a meta that isn't necessarily, that is kind of messy, opens the door for a lot of for like skilled deck builders to be able to pilot some weird things to the top, and that could cause all sorts of things. So there are those things to consider as well looking at this. So moving on, let's talk about a few different things. First off, Galaxy Prime, Brett's deck that ended up topping the event. I mean, there's definitely two things to take into consideration here. One, if you look at the OI winning Galaxy Prime deck, and Naga alluded to this earlier, compared to the EI winning Galaxy Prime deck, it's a night and day difference. In fact, I was talking with Brett about this a couple hours ago, and I have both decks up on screen. But there are definitely some questionable decisions in the EI Galaxy Prime deck. Incoming transmission first and foremost among them, because one, it only allows you to put the energy packs on top of your deck if you have it in hand, but also it's an orange, and if you are playing a control strategy like this, you want to be minimizing that orange count so that way you can control the battles as much as possible. Also, the ranged package isn't necessarily the best thing in that could be put in the deck. It's definitely a high roll inclusion. Equipment Enthusiast being at 2 doesn't make a whole lot of sense considering how many upgrades this gets on the field. Field Communicator's a bit of a high roll inclusion. Handheld being at 2 is a baffling decision. Like, if you look at the two things side by side, Brett definitely has taken kind of the general strategy from the EI deck and optimized it to a point where it is a much more sound control strategy while also bringing in these techs from the fan sets. I mean, you look in the main deck, you have Impetuous there to deal with certain upgrades that might cause the fits for this strategy. You see Maceration Laser in as a way to turn your third character in Ayuk into a major attacker. You see Turnabout Snare in the sideboard to deal with certain threats. You see Stim Shock, Tetranite, and Electrostatic Shielding in the side to deal with certain threats. You see Ironic in the side as a Pierce Negator. So it is just amazing kind of how Brett has been able to take like a general concept in a deck that was kind of suspicious once you look at what was in it, and sort of transform it into something that is a much more sound package and overall is a much more powerful deck. And with that being said, though, like, this is the only blue deck that was able to do anything on the winner's bracket of the OI. Like, in the loser's bracket, all the blue decks over there either got bounced the moment they hit the loser's bracket or only won, like, a single match. So, like, what is this finish for Brett and the kind of the Galaxy Prime control strategy? What does it mean for, like, blue overall, in addition to what happened on the loser's bracket?
Oh, I've been muted the whole time. Oh my gosh. I've been talking. Sorry, a bit process, but I mean, when you do look, you're not wrong. Like, mine and Techno's Fort Max is 7th and 8th place, and we're blue lent. We'd obviously go more. We would call ourselves a blue list, and trying to hit triggers is what we'd have oranges in there for. But other than that, you have Brett's deck as the only one that's blue that made it to the top 8, and won. For that fact, I mean, if you look at the rest of them as well, you go Frank was blue, Sandman was a blue Sports Patrol as well, and then there was obviously the tanks, and I believe the tanks was a bit more mixed anyway, actually. So there wasn't actually that much showing of blue in here.
And I mean,
and I think that's.
Sorry, you were saying?
I think that's just because everyone thought good old Orange Black would just win the day again, but yeah, it looks like it really didn't. No, there wasn't a lot of showing. The only ones really there was the Devastator lists.
Right, and also, probably, I do want to mention this, the fact that, like, this is the only blue deck that was able to advance into the top 4 and ended up winning the thing, I should mention is a testament to Brett's, like, skill level, because, like I've said before, he is one of the best players, if not the best player in the game, and I would actually make the argument that he is the best player in the game at the moment. Obviously, he has the title of Best in the World, but best in the world, like, I would make the argument he has it. Like, he's unquestionably the winningest player in the game, so there definitely is that skill factor when looking at this deck that you have to take into consideration, and when analyzing kind of the blue, the power level of blue right now. So I did want to just bring that up.
Yeah. Well, it's a very good point. I think Brett's matches did go very well, and some of them, especially the harder ones.
Right.
Not to draw back from anything of it's a very good win. But it's like the thing we thought Devastator would be able to just go through, but I mean, putting 3 packs on and just constantly slowly taking them out while just increasing your health for free managed to mean that Devastators have to kind of like think over again. And then how Brett built his deck was just, I mean, you saw it, and it was a good run with Aussie, but Brett's deck just really pulls the middle finger at Orange in every way possible, and there's nothing you can do unless you have some PS in there, or you play Belligerence. So,
which I did, and even that wasn't enough to help propel Devastator past it. So,
but yeah, exactly.
But going back to the point of what does this mean for blue going forward? Is really Galaxy Prime going to be the only viable control strategy we see, or are there potentially some things that have yet to be explored or might be creeping up in viability that we could see going into the next season?
Well,
Yeah. I was gonna say that. Yeah, I think there's still a lot of unearthed potential and control, and I think that. I think as far as I would say the inclinations of creators and allied crossplay, I think they're very control friendly for the most part. There's definitely creators that are more orange and probably would devote more of their energy towards orange if they were building on their own, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd say for the most part, most of the creators, at least as far as their sort of wants to build, generally tend to play towards blue and more control. I think also because of a want for a more balanced meta, and I am very happy to say that as far as the meta as it appears right now is definitely a lot more friendly for obviously because of partially because of Brett's victory, a lot more friendly to control than it used to be. I mean, if you look at the days of Encounter 1 and Encounter 2, we're looking at orange. We're looking at the orange-black Scourge of, and I'm not talking about Scourge as a herald of Unicron. I'm talking about Scourge as something very bad for the game. Where most winning decks were just spamming orange-black, and it was just, it was not a good time for basically anybody in the game.
Right.
And I think I could see the. I don't think orange-black is ever going to go away. Like, Champions deck. Definitely didn't perform as well as it has in sort of previous events. Also, it didn't have a lot of the same cards that it has had in previous events. So a lot of the sort of temporary ban lists, permanent ban lists took a lot, and also just took a lot of that potential away in that deck. And I think that at the end of the at the end of the day, that's a good thing for the game because it just allowed for more diversity. And and I think that I would say our willingness to go down that road and just really, swallow our, I guess, adoration of Hasbro and Wizards in a lot of cases where, we can sort of state, maybe some of those cards they made weren't all that balanced and all that good because they had a very short timeline to actually develop Wave 5 before they all got kicked out of the building or into other teams.
Right.
And so I think that was a big realization for us, and I think that opened up a lot of potential as far as what can truly be played diversity-wise for the game.
Right, and I think right now, speaking to your point on, Garrus 9 and rotating stuff out, we are definitely using that system in a ban list setting that's more akin to, Yu-Gi-Oh! Compared to, Magic and stuff like that, because, in, Magic and stuff, the ban list, from my understanding, is generally used as a way to take overpowered cards out back and you can get the rest of that. Yep, exactly. But the Garrus 9 list is more akin to how Yu-Gi-Oh's ban list functions, where yes, Yu-Gi-Oh's ban list can be used to just instantly slap down overpowered cards, but Yu-Gi-Oh's ban list also is used as a tool to not necessarily destroy the top decks, but curb them in a way to bring them more in line with other things that may need to see play. So, and in this game in particular, where cards aren't instantly gonna win you the game, like 90% of the time, the tool I think is a bit more effective, just because of the fact that where am I going with this, and why am I getting added? Anyways, what was I saying? Talking about the ban list.
Yu-Gi-Oh ban list and how they don't really.
Yes, so they do hit cards, but they use it sometimes as a tool to bring decks in rain. And you were just saying, we used it for that purpose here multiple times to bring some of these blue-black decks down a little bit. And again, this is why I think this kind of ban list is actually decent for this game, because there aren't too many cards that are just busted out the ass, but there are the occasional ones that are a bit too swingy kind of on their own, so they need to be put into a... That's really good. Into a bit of a headlock, which is what I was trying to say. So some of that may have been cut, but whatever.
I mean, that's really good because, the conditions may occur in the game later where some cards that were previously broken are actually fine.
Right.
Thanks to power creep, right?
Right, exactly. And I mean, this happens in Yu-Gi-Oh! All the time. The ban list, we're recording this on technically the 17th, but whatever. The ban list just went up today, and they moved some cards off that the power level of the overall game had eclipsed them, and you just said it. That is kind of also the intent of the Garrus 9 list.
Titan Master Bodies in particular. They we're kind of feeling things out as far as how like Fangry and Horrible are going to be playing in the new season. We're open to that. Some people are very pessimistic about it. I prefer, since it's the preseason, I'm like, why not? Let's give it a shot, right? It doesn't count for anything. So let's have some fun.
Right. So we've talked a lot about that. Moving on to Metroplex. This was definitely, probably, in my opinion, the biggest left field deck of this. And when I say left field, I mean just like came out of nowhere. Not a lot of people were expecting it. But Ozzy was talking about how he thought this was going to be a good move considering the prevalence of Devastator, and he was right for the wrong reasons. He was right about the deck being good, but it wasn't because like there was Devastator running around. And like looking at his list, like there's one thing I do want to talk about, and I've talked about this before. His deck is definitely leaning more towards orange, and that's by design, so that way if he misses a trigger, he still just smacks somebody for a ton of damage. But, like, what exactly in this metagame do you think helped propel Metroplex, I should say, to that second place finish?
I think it was completely different. Like, if you compare it with E5, with Fort Max, right? And in that one there was hardly any belligerences and stuff like that, which was a bit was as a hard counter to Fort Max, and as Ozzy will tell you, same with Metroplex. The one thing that I always found interesting was the thing that you want to be in with Metroplex. I mean, with Fort Max, you wanted to stay in your big boy mode, right? And your game goes downward. Like you're a slow decline in your game as you start losing parts. Like you lose your damage output in part 1, then you're a Cerebros where you have more control. However, with Metroplex, it's completely different, right? Like you have a 35 HP big swinger there, and your game is on at the start, and then you kind of just. Ozzy's kind of fell down a little bit as the game carried on, right? Like he wants to finish it off, and we're looking at decks that go, okay, I'm probably going to see Devastators, but what actually happened in your game plan is, okay, I need to hit 9s, and then I just need to take out these little dudes. But you come together with one big dude at the start, and then that you're not sort of tooled for that, right? Mm-hmm. We even see in some of the games that Legendary versed where he managed to get belligerence in. He gets damage in, but it's just like, I think he won that, but other than that, his wide swings with untaps on cars, Devastator swings, it's not always the end of the world just because it's a giant body with a good attack total that can put out a lot of damage. So yeah, it was really just sort of, like you said, it was out of left field. I don't think anyone expected to verse a 35 HP target that can just slowly kill you off one by one. Right. It's a completely different ball game to, say, to Fort Max and even Devastator in most cases, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Bill, do you think there was anything like in the design choices of BFA and kind of like how those cards have panned out that you think allowed for Metroplex to rise up, and not even just BFA, probably the whole allied crossplay side of things is probably a better thing to ask about here. Like, is there any design decisions you've seen in those or cards that have been released that helped Metroplex to spring back up, and Metroplex springing back up as a relevant deck? What does that mean going forward for other decks as new cards come out from allied crossplay designers?
I think the replacement of Peace Through Tyranny with Take the Shot made a big difference for Metroplex decks in general. Just giving another opportunity for, providing a non-color benefit to Metroplex, and two, also providing bold in a pinch. So I think for as far as triggering is concerned, and plus I think Ozzy's build just also wanting to swing really hard and just smack the crap out of something. Right. Either in the case where the proc goes off or not. I think that was I know that Ozzy was really excited about Metroplex just sort of existing in this double card, double pip environment once again, rather than, I would say, the the environment in other communities and play scenes where they just simply removed Peace Through Tyranny and Sec Check rather than providing a replacement. I think it just provided that much more opportunity for Metaplex to continue to thrive.
Right.
I know that in World Strike there wasn't any real direct benefit. It'd be hard pressed to find Metaplex direct support in that set. But the one thing we did do is we wanted to make sure that Metaplex wouldn't be eliminated by any of our design choices. So,
Right.
I don't think we definitely never got in that way because we wanted to make sure that Metaplex would thrive. But Metaplex is also one of those cards or one of those decks where you kind of don't want to support it too much because if it starts proccing too much, then it gets really oppressive.
Right.
Funny we're talking about oppress because oppress was there was some early talk in the development of Wastelands where we were like, well, we know we want to have some sort of bold and tough counter as a keyword. Are we in trouble of potentially making Metaplex into a less viable deck? And that's why inevitable force or inexorable force was made, just to give Metaplex an out in that regard. It's like, well, Metaplex, you want to see him use bold, but he doesn't use bold in the same way that a lot of other really oppressive decks do, in the sense that Fangry, Barrage, Orange Black. He's just trying to make us proc, which is fine.
Right. So, yeah, that's that. And moving on to probably what I would consider kind of the boogeyman of this format, Devastator. Now, this was one of 2 decks, 3 if you count the whole cars thing, that saw multiple representations. I was on the version that was running more orange. Ciliag was on a version that was running more black. We got 3rd and 4th place respectively. And there are kind of really 2 things I want to talk about here. And Naga, I believe you've already alluded to this a little bit. But the mental impact of Devastator. I mean, I think you've admitted that you were playing Fort Max because of the fear of Devastator. Ozzy admitted he was playing Metroplex because of the fear of Devastator. How much of the overall field do you think was building their deck, keeping Devastator in the back of their mind?
I'll make sure I'm not muted. I think quite a lot. I mean, to be fair, if you look through a lot of the stuff in the sideboards and some of the decks that are there, say you could immediately go and say Cars is actually a very good counter to Devastator. As we've seen recently, as we've played a little bit of Hawk, being able to untap and swing back in and kill little dudes without your guys dying and not letting wheel turns happen is really good. So Sandman's stuff, which was actually really interesting talking to him, unfortunately got paired against Fort Max first round, which is obviously not what his deck was designed to beat. But Sport Card Patrol was pretty interesting. That mental impact of him maybe wanting to play that was pretty cool as well. But overall, you see, Brett's sideboard is literally Electrostatic Shields, a Tetranite, and Stim Shock, and in hostilities, right? And that's obviously counteracting that sort of orange vomit as it was. I know for myself, it was definitely one of the things that affected some of my sideboard options as well. I would say that obviously Aussie playing Metroplex was definitely a big indicator that he was we were expecting to see Devastator as well. I mean, it's not so much just in the sideboard, it's all over as well. I mean, you see a couple Corneds again. We haven't seen Corned since back in Wave 2 when that was played, when there was Superions around, Celiag's one has got a Corned in there. I know Energon Hustler Dave, he had a Corned in his sideboard as well, I'm pretty sure. So
and I would like to jump in here quickly and say that I'm pretty sure Ozzy actually did drop that cornered on me at one point, and it did significantly screw me over, so that was definitely a huge thing.
Yeah, exactly. That, seeing Corneds going disarms, I think is just... I don't think you need to say much more. That the mental impact of Devastator was there. Because there wasn't much prevailing combiners at that stage. There was a Superion that would have done It was a very good Superion. Unfortunately, matches were unfortunate to Frank, a Metaplex, and then a Magray Devastator.
Gee, I wonder whose fault that was.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, seeing 3 copies, I believe it was only 3 copies of Cornered, pop up in sideboards was just like, there's 2 in the top 4 already. I mean, I can't find them exactly, but it's definitely Devastator's mental impact was huge if people are playing Cornered again.
Right. And Bill, you got any comments on this?
Yeah, I don't see Devastator. I would say he's going to remain in people's mindsets, but I don't think he'll have as much staying power, with potential staying power, as he did at the end of the season. I think that deck has lots of weak spots, a lot of weak spots, and I think that people will start to spying them more and more over time. Cornered was a big one, right?
Mm-hmm. And I even playing matches with Devastator, I was already noticing some significant weaknesses of it. Like, even the way my deck was built, like, it could very easily be exploited, and we saw that kind of incidentally, but also kind of intentionally against in my winners finals match against Brett. Like, the way that Heat of Battle matches up against that is absolutely terrible.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's definitely some huge swingy moments if you happen to get the cards and such, but like, I would argue that Hijack is actually really dependable in that matchup, and not a lot of people were playing it. Hey, you want some extra card draw and take it away from Devastator play? Why not, right?
Remind me to censor this part out.
Like, you can predict, Old Faithful when Devastator player is going to flip a card, flip one of his cards, and you get a card draw. Hey, there's already Hijack on the field because I kind of knew that you were going to flip a character. Hey,
I wonder why.
Yeah. And so, then you're going to see other, sort of decks come out, like it's in BFC. Abominus is a pretty hard counter. And so, yeah, I think I've always been fine with Devastator's power level because I think he starts out strong, but I think the more people play against him, the more they'll see there's opportunity there as well.
Right. And then, speaking of opportunities, or actually maybe that's not the right transition, but as I alluded to earlier, there were 2 versions of Devastator. One was more orange heavy, one was more black heavy. Is there really a prevailing, or is there, a lean towards one or the other, do you think, in the meta? Because, we saw these decks go head-to-head, and I took that matchup. Admittedly, Celiac did make a pretty significant misplay in Game 2, but that deck, I will admit, that was one of the most skill-testing matches I have ever played, in this game, period. So, is there really a favorite between the 2 versions of the deck, and is there one that we might see become more prevalent going forward?
I think it just depends. I think if you were to look at the overall breakdown here and go, okay, so Galaxy Prime was more of a blue list, then that's where you would go, okay, I'm going to favor more the PS list, right? In that sort of mindset. When you consider them side by side in a matchup, you should always kind of win if you're the heavier orange player, right? Versus a PS deck, because your damage output against an orange team is going to be a lot higher than theirs would, because you include your double oranges, you have more stuff that's more important than cards that you might see like combat daggers, for instance. They're weaker in terms of a flamethrower for orange. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think both are very good, but it would actually just depend what a lot of decks show up. I say right now, if you're going to go say, what's going to happen next event, what would people think about playing Devastator? They might go, okay, Galaxy Prime 1 might be on people's minds. I should probably play the black, or the more PS heavier version of Devastator, because it will work better against this than the more orange. But then, as soon as you start rolling, it's like a ball effect, right? Like, as soon as more PS heavy Devastators come up, you can go, okay, I'm going to play more of the orange heavy one, Mm-hmm. So I don't say you'd probably see one or the other be more prevailing. Overall, I'd say you'd see one of them being better, and then you'd see probably a switch. And it's nice that the deck is diverse and it can do one or the other pretty effectively.
Right, and that definitely is true. And again, if it's on that cycle where it becomes a bit hard to tell what version is going to pop up at what time, I think that's good for the health of the game, just because of the fact that it, again, rewards deck builders who are planning ahead and trying to figure out, like, which version is going to see more play at a specific time. And again, for the overall health of the game, that is a good thing. And while we're on the subject of aggro teams, I do want to talk about the other non-Devi aggro teams that were floating around during this event. I'm just looking at it here. We saw a Cars deck that Legendary was running. Wheeljank was running Bugs. Burgos Bold was still floating around. Mega Ratchet, I believe, had a slightly more aggro lean. And, like, what is, like, the overall state of these with Devastator, at the very least, being kind of a front runner in the aggro kind of, you know, what's the word I'm looking for here? Aggro archetype, if for lack of a better term.
I reckon it's pretty interesting. I think Devastator just sort of proven to be efficient. Because it used to be Cars, right? Whenever you would go and think about a list for aggro, you'd probably think of Cars as sort of the default archetype. Obviously, before Wave 5 happened and we got the triple bandits of, like, fun.
The Three Stooges, as I've liked to call them.
Yeah. You'd probably think of Cars, right?
Yep.
So, I mean, Cars is nice to see up. Bugs. My gosh, Bugs was a really cool thing to see prop up. Especially in Wheeljank's list. Looking at it was like one white icon, I think I saw, like, out of memory, one or two white icons in that list.
Yeah, only one. I'm looking at it right now. It was only one.
Yeah. So, you know, you'll which is actually pretty smart. You'll kick back, flipping lots of cards. 8 at default. If you flip that white, you go to 10. But I mean, it's not like there's going to be 4 in there, and you flip 2, and you actually miss out on damage. Instead, he's just going to go ahead and flip his 8 cards and make sure that he's always going to hit 8. If he hits that white, he goes to 9. Like, that's how it works. So it's guaranteeing that damage there, which is nice. I'd say Devastator only came up on top over these options just because it was more of an immediate in-your-face, like, this is good. Like, hey, I'm good. I have a high health pool. I'm going to draw you cards. Like Cars would, I can play orange-black. Cars does have a somewhat difficult time doing that just because of the pieces that they have in their archetype that they want to use.
Right.
So, I reckon all the other aggro options are really good, but I think it's just mainly because we're in a state of where like we've said throughout the entire thing, the meta hasn't set. There is no concrete, this is the best thing in the world, like in Allied Crossplay, there's no concrete thing. And Devastator was going to be able to take the opportunity of not having everyone know what's the best thing, what's refined, what's the best answers for most stuff, and being like, hey, I'm just default good, you know, play me.
Right. And also, like, if we look at the results, if I remember correctly, a lot of the aggro decks were losing to very similar things that Devastator was losing to. So that honestly is a good indicator of the fact that, like, the way the game is at right now, it's very much how do I want to phrase this? Bill, you can jump in here if you want to add on to this, but, like,
nothing is certain.
Yeah, nothing is certain. Yeah, that's probably the best way to put it. Like,
there's no strategy that will always win. There's no safe bet in building right now. I guarantee you. The winningest deck in the OI has hard counters, right. Extremely hard counters in Allied Crossplay.
Or
it's
like,
just that nobody chose to play them.
The way that I would describe it is that since these decks are so similar and they're losing to very similar things, the way you're going to actually be able to win with these on, like, at the highest level is going to be leveraging what each archetype brings to the table. I mean, Devastator is just a ridiculous advantage engine. Cars has a lot of attack manipulation with their untaps. Bugs is, I don't know exactly what their thing is, but they have something like being able to leverage those differences is going to be key. And the fact that each one has a different option is going to be nice for players who see a specific thing that a deck does and kind of, you know, want to latch onto it and are not going to get punished for not selecting a different deck that does a similar thing but has a different specialty.
Yeah. That diversity and the once again not being able to really bet on anything in particular, always being able to win, is going to make things very interesting in the months ahead, I think.
Right.
And even I still maintain that Devastator. There are going to be a lot of people that are going to be piling Devastator, and I would say not a lot of them are going to be successful at Devastator. There'd be a few, but I think they might find that, especially as players face them more, they're just going to have more and more of a hard time. And I think that both Celiag and Uhawk, you kind of jumped on Devastator at a very opportune time.
Right.
I would say that was probably not likely to repeat in quite the same way.
Yeah, unless we find some new development with it, and even then, I am not the person to discover that. I am a decent pilot. I am not a good deck builder. Like, I was talking with Brett about this earlier. Like, if you had seen my original Devastator layout for E5, you would have openly questioned my sanity. The only reason I got anywhere in that event is because Naga actually stepped in to help me re-engineer that deck, and then did the same thing before the OI, so... Like, I have said this multiple times, but I do owe some of my success in the OI to Naga, stepping in and saying, hey, this is a terrible decision, here's what you should probably be doing instead. So, moving along down the list, are there any other cards that either of you, like, saw in the character or stratagem, well, maybe not the stratagem department, we'll talk about that in a minute, but anything in the character department that you think the stock on it is kind of up or down?
No, like, it's so weird. I think everything kind of relates to what happened. I think you could say, make a point, like, there's a single parsec, but that's because there's no Fangry, right?
Right.
There's no dramatic increase. Like, if you look at the bot usage, there's nothing that got used more than twice in a deck.
Right, and even
that,
then, those double uses were Demolisher between a Tank Deck and Burgos Bold, Fort Max, you kind of have to, and then all the Constructicons, and then outside of that, it's just a random mishmash of all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, there's 2 Bronze, which is, yet again, that's Burgos Bold and Vangelis. There's 2 Fireflights in there, that's a, I can't even remember where the other Fireflight was, but I know that was a, Aerial Sand.
I think it was Zero's deck that was running Fireflight.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, other than that, there's just, like, it's really weird. It's all over the place. I mean, Prowl from Wave 2 coming into a cars list with Dead End and Drag Strip, that's overall a pretty interesting list for cars, not something that you'd see every day as well.
Right.
Lord Megatron coming in, which is actually pretty cool to see with the Bonsaitron, which is pretty good. I mean, we haven't seen much play from the Monsterbot character, so seeing Bonsaitron and Mega Ratchet show up is pretty cool. Actually, Acid Storm is at a 2-of. We saw some play in E4, but I mean, 2 of it propping up is pretty interesting to see as well. But
what was the second deck that ran it? Sandman's deck was running it. I did not realize that. I never got to see that deck, so I'm honestly just looking at this for the first time. I did not realize he was running Acid Storm.
Yeah, so I mean, there's no drastic changes. I think this is just a pretty much spread out, very diverse list of characters. There's hardly any ups or downs. I would not say bet stonks on any character's play going up or down, really. I mean, it's very diverse, which is what you want to see.
Mm-hmm. Albeit on the opposite end of the diversity scale, let's talk about the Titan Masters that were banned for this event. So Garrus 9, the restriction this time around, I believe Sky Shadow Sync was on it, is that correct?
Yeah, Sky Shadow was also banned.
Okay, but also
Sing.
Quake, Fangry, and Horrible were on the list. And just as kind of a hypothetical, where exactly do you think these guys would have stepped in to make an impact on this event?
Oh. This event would have changed drastically. I feel like Ozzy would not have played Metaplex. he would have played probably his Soundwave most likely.
Right.
You would have seen that. Brett probably would have not played Galaxy. He probably would have actually run the triple threat of all three of them. As well. You could see Burgos Bold throwing in a Fangry. I mean, immediately, just off the top of my head, if Fangry was on the list, you'd see it up by 3, and then you see Parsec up by 2 again. Yeah, and then there'd be lots of decks that probably wouldn't really want to do what they do. I mean, you'd probably still see Gilfor in there. That would have been a really good choice. But as making the final decision of Fort Max, it probably wouldn't have been as easy, to be completely honest. Fangry is a pain to deal with when you're Fort Max, so...
Right. So,
yeah.
But that goes to speak to the diversity of this event, and if those guys stepped in and instantly neuters that at its core, so... Again, that just goes to show the effectiveness of why Garrus 9, or of Garrus 9, and why that's a good thing that it exists, because they can allow for things like this when needed. And moving on quickly, speaking of things that were missing, Stratagems. This was honestly kind of surprising for me to look at. If you look at the Stratagem usage on the page, OI page on Teletrain, which, by the way, shout out to Zero for revamping the tournament page. It has made finding talking points for this video so much easier, and it's overall just a lot more interesting to look at just from a data standpoint. But if you look at the Stratagem usage, there were only 8 Stratagems total in the event. 2 Malevolent Architect, 2 Silveric Deluge, a Villainous, a Beacon, a Slingshot, and an Obfuscating Cloud. And of those, the only strats to crack the top 4 were the 2 Malevolent Architect decks. So what's going on with Stratagems right now?
I think Stratagems are in a pretty interesting place. And to be completely honest, I wouldn't say that you should always see Stratagems in a good handful of the decks, right? I think only having 2 Malevolent Architects in the top 4 is good. I mean, that's kind of what made Devastator. Devastator wouldn't be what it is right now without that Stratagem, which is kind of the point, right? When you view at what Stratagems are meant to do, they're meant to make characters that don't see play go from like a tier 4 or a tier 3 and maybe bump them up a tier. There's not every intent for them to make them top tier decks, right? So Villainous Spotlight's pretty generic. Brutal Conditioning's a little bit hard because it got nerfed to 2 stars a little while ago. So I think people are still trying to really they've put it in the binder as such because they don't really want to try some of the tools it actually has available outside of Exhaust and Horrible. In the Name of Slingshot was very cool to see pop up. It makes Superion a bit better, gives them 6 wide. Obfuscating Cloud, I honestly thought Safeguard Cars would have been a really annoying thing to deal with, I
thought so too, and that one kind of, objectively fell flat on its face.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, when you consider the stratagems that we actually have to play with, and the characters that they pair with, there's not really many of them that should stand out and go, okay, now I'm a tier 1 character.
Right.
Especially the ones from Wave 5. I think the only other one that you would see play would be Sky Shadow Sync. The rest of them sort of just added to more of the niche characters, to some of the SRTs. The ones in BFA, they're very good and they help some of the characters that have blank abilities, don't have any abilities on either sides. They're a bit higher in star cost, but they don't turn them into the top tier stuff, right? Which is kind of where stratagems should sit anyway.
Right.
So,
Bill, you got anything to add to this from a design perspective?
No, I think that's. I always think that you have stratagems like a Trigger Convention where that's what makes the team. Honestly, that's a well I probably wouldn't want to go to very much. That was sort of very intentionally done, but as sort of an experiment. Let's just do a stratagem that kind of defines the team and only puts them within that very narrow silo.
Right.
But as far as stratagems in general, I always thought that they should, add iterative power. They shouldn't generally define a team.
Right.
I think Malevolent Architect definitely goes into that territory, and I think there was a lot of horseshoes that fell into the right place when that stratagem, I think, was being made, because I think that could have gone downhill as far as like power level very easily. I feel it just so happened that it landed in a very good spot at the end, and I think probably a lot of that is intentional. I don't think all of it is. I think that there's a little bit of an accident there, as far as like, well, we made a powerful deck. Oops.
Yeah, but
honestly, I'm kind of glad that that's not the norm. That's more of the exception.
Right, and I am definitely I am definitely trying to do that with a little project I am working on with Legendary and Scorp. More information on that in the future. But moving along, there are some battle card choices that I did want to talk about, kind of in a stock up and down manner again. First off, Belligerence and End Hostilities. These are still 5 steps away from being blowouts, or some cases are blowouts. So, thoughts on these two cards still floating around?
Okay. In a Fort Max perspective, I hate Belligerence, just because I'm a 1 tall. But do I think it's a surprise that it's gone up? Not really. It's a good card. Do I think it's broken? No. I mean, you can arguably say the end of turn effect is really good for wide teams, but I mean, there's a couple things like Designated Target, and then there's Heat of Battle. I mean, we can use your game against Aussie as sort of an example, right? Heat of Battle is a lot better for you to get than it was Belligerence. Mm-hmm. Even though Aussie really hates the card, and you're giving a deck that's almost equally blue as is orange, you still put out more damage with Heat of Battle than you did with Belligerence. If you throw it towards Legendary side of the field, where he got it against Aussie, that game that he drew it first turn and played it with, 3 of his cards there, he just kind of won the game at that point, right? He did a boat ton of damage. So I think in the right deck, it becomes insanely good. There is 12 in sideboards, and then there is 4 copies in main boards throughout the II, so you could say 16 copies throughout decks. In there, say, I think maybe the event of more orange coming up and using that as a tool for blue, because that's always going to be there. Then there's also the fact of, Fort Max won the last event, and I did make my point to everyone that you guys really didn't play Belligerence. I mean, and that was it was just the point of how I kind of managed to take that away. If people played more Belligerence, the E5 would have gone completely different, right? But now that we're pulling it in, it's a lot better. Is it broken? I don't think so. End Hostilities. I think End Hostilities is the one that you would even consider really looking at. I think End Hostilities is an amazing card, and it needs to be there. Because you can't do both, right? In a blue deck, you can God hope and pray that you can put like a Tetranite, Microloaning, End Hostilities, and all the anti-orange and the anti-pair stuff in, but you won't efficiently counter both of them, right? So the sideboard options need to be there. And as like secret actions are, they're always counterable. I mean, if you think your opponent's got an End Hostilities, you can just be like, okay, I'll just Grenade Launcher, right? And then you go, oh well, like you stopped 2 of my attack instead of me playing a Power Punch, Like, yep. There is safer default plays. I'd say that an immediate player reaction to these things being on the field is a bit, grumbly, but I think it is just, I think they're fine. There is going to be cards that are always going to be good to have, and these are just going to be those cards, I mean, like Grenade Launcher. Like, no one complains about Grenade Launcher.
Right.
And,
Right. Bill, you got anything to add to this?
Yeah, I think Belligerence is incredibly powerful, especially for wide aggro teams. I don't believe it's crossed the threshold of broken. I think maybe it's just a question that maybe there just needs to be more answers to those cards. Because I think, they provide a powerful effect, but definitely times where it doesn't work. Facing other aggro teams. You're probably sideboarding for something else. Something a little bit more appropriate for that matchup.
Wait, who just hopped in? Somebody just hopped in. What's going on? Okay, sorry about that. Legendary accidentally wandered in here. Anyways, Bill, what were you saying?
Maybe we just require more answers to those two cards. And hostilities and belligerence. Maybe there could be design in the future that allows some answers to that. But it's sort of in a weird spot where belligerence provides a lot of utility, but I don't feel like it's entirely broken. And I get Ozzy's complaint. At the same time, he also got second. So,
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe we need to. Maybe that card needs to be, just some sort of answer to Metaplex if he continues getting second in events, right?
Right.
I think there's a catem like a roundabout loop with belligerence, right? I mean, if you want to sit there and argue and say it's like OP, and then go, okay, screw everyone else, I want to play this card, and then you see everyone start playing this card, and then we get to the orange meta, then what happens? Belligerence then does nothing, because everyone's playing orange, and then you're wasting a card slot. The more orange and more lenient, you probably lean towards belligerence, right? So, in itself, as soon as it gets more popular, it starts hurting itself in turn. Right? Because you could see orange decks playing 3 of it in the sideboard, no question, right? Like, it's an auto-include in sideboards. You may even throw 1 in the main, 2 on the side. But at the point where you start seeing more orange, like maybe this event here was a little bit more lenient, was definitely more orange than it was blue, if, say, the Fort Max is swapped out for more orange decks there, then you'd be heavily tipped, and then you'd go, well, there's a 30% chance I'm going to have an opponent where this card's actually going to be useful. Is it now actually worth still playing it? Or you might go, yes, but then as you carry on and people don't want to play against belligerence, people will start playing belligerence, and then everyone has no fun with it.
Right, and again, part of that loop is rewarding deck builders who are able to correctly determine when the time is to cut it and when the time is to bring it in. So having that loop is inherently kind of good for the game in that perspective. So there's that discussion. A card that definitely I think the stock is up on is Rage. Like, we've seen melee support finally show up here with BFA, but Rage is one that doesn't necessarily fall into the standard melee archetype of doing damage to yourself, but it's still a pretty good card. 11 copies across 5 decks in the event. I know I was running 3 copies of it, and thoughts on this card?
I think Rage is very good. I always like giving melee stuff for orange because I think it's good, because there's stuff like Sturdy Javelin is pretty good, and it's a diverse thing. For aggro heads, it's either +2 or ping2, which is a really good tool for aggro. And then having something as good as Rage, when you look at it in terms of Jaws of Steel from Wave 1, where you gave Dinobots a flamethrower on a utility slot, and you go, well, I can still put a grenade launcher on this guy, right? You kind of do somewhat the same thing. Like, you can almost argue Bold 2 is the same as Bold 1 with a ping, right? You kind of throw out the same amount of damage, and you give melee characters instead, which is obviously a lot larger range of characters than just Dinobots. You give them, a very powerful tool, right? So, I think that's really cool. Because especially when you think about it, Wage Formation was showing up, Sturdy Javelin was showing up, so you're seeing lots of aggro decks playing more of these range characters being a bit more annoying, but you can go and make a card like Rage and go, hey, if you wanna lean more melee, we got a really good card for you. So
right. And from a design perspective, and I know Bill, you'll probably get behind this as well, but the fact that it plays in the same ballpark as basic combat protocol without necessarily obsoleting it on the same ballpark as Jaws of Steel, as an example, because most Dinobots are melee, but they can still play this if they need to spread damage around a little more, or they can go Jaws of Steel if they just need to punch a little bit harder. So it plays into that same role that those two cards also play into, but it keeps those other options open, and that's a design goal that has been hammered home constantly with Allied crossplay. And Bill, I'm assuming you agree with me on that point?
Oh yeah, it also adds to the ecosystem for Melee. Somebody eventually is going to be playing a CNA armor and pulling that rage out. I'm looking forward to that. Making that decision.
I just
Making
realized
that.
that actually may be relevant for the card I'm designing for winning the Casual Cup, but we'll talk about that in the future. That is actually, oh my god, that is actually a relevant play. Holy crap, I am going to have to start teching that in. Anyways, moving along the lines. Photon Charge. Now, this was a card that I've been high on for a while. If you look at it, though, there's only 5 copies in 2 decks, and I believe the only other deck the only decks to play it were the 2 Devastator builds, so thoughts on Photon Charge going around, especially with certain other cards getting hit?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the other orange lists here, you don't really want to be playing this weapon. I mean, you kind of go towards, and you could view our Disruptor Blade. Like, it's a very good weapon. If you hit a black icon, you get to keep it, and it's slightly better than Erratic Lightning, because you don't have the minus. But when you think about it in that terms, most of the time back in the day, you kind of just didn't really want that orange icon. So if you were playing an orange-black list, you would then put that in, but then when you look at it, this really didn't give me, like, lots of utility, right? Like, it was just a +3. Sometimes the orange Erratic Lightning was better. Now, if you looked at Photon Charge, you go, okay, now I have something that hurts myself, but then I ping my target, and when I'm playing something like Devastator, I really want to do that, right? The little dudes biting the ankles, sort of thing. Breaking the kneecaps or whatever you want to call it. It's a really viable tool for them. Plus, they want to play orange and they want to play black. And then at that point, your guy's a little. You take a damage. Mixmaster, the very good common character that you played it on as well, didn't take the damage, and you were able to use that to its, utmost of a +3 shoot someone else for 1. So it's a very good weapon. I just don't think that people wanted to play orange-black just because Fangry went out, and it was kind of uncharted territory without Fangry at that point,
Right, and Bill, do you have anything to add, since obviously you had a hand in designing this card, so do you think it's kind of in a prime position going forward? What are your opinions on the card right now?
Yeah, I had a hand on Photon Charge, and then I set it off, and I realized I didn't have 2 defense, so yeah, I took a little damage, but, at least I took the other guy out with me. Anyways, but yeah, I mean, Photon Charge is definitely designed around ankle biters, where, the little guy might take a little extra damage, but who cares? He's probably going to die next swing anyway, so it doesn't really inconsequential. Was definitely thinking about sharks in the beginning, really early on with Photon Charge, just to spread that damage out a little bit. In the end design, it didn't work out so well for them, but utility was very well suited for current formed Constructicons. And I'm glad that was a nice natural fit, because, once again, I don't really take pleasure in designing cards that everybody tries to use. I take pleasure in cards that are just really useful for certain builds. I think that's, it fits that build really well, and I'm glad it's, getting more acceptance.
Right. So, moving down the list, Energize. Oh, yeah, you have a
Could I jump in, just because we're still talking about community cards, and this is something that I think should be brought up. Because it did really well. There is only 1 turnabout snare here. Now, and Brett's usage of turnabout snare was very good. And I think this is a card that was definitely underplayed in the OI, that now, once people actually really see it, they probably will actually start considering it a little bit more. I did not see it much in the sideboards as such, but it's definitely only 1 in the main board, but I feel like people might get a bit more interested in it after seeing how Brett used it so effectively.
Right, and also, let's talk about Turnabout Snare here. At the beginning of the season, it was unquestionably overpowered. It was easily like a 2 or 3 of in every deck. Nowadays, it is to this point where we're having discussions like, do you run Turnabout Snare in a particular meta, do you not? And we're starting to see a lean back towards, yes, this meta is suited for running it. Like, going into the OI, we thought it was going to be a wider meta where Turnabout Snare wasn't going to be necessarily as good, and Hold the Line is more the play. And, like, in every deck that I've been building nowadays, I've been main decking Hold the Line and siding Turnabout Snare. But now we're, like you said, we're going into a position where Turnabout Snare might be more the correct play to employ just because of the decks that we are seeing at the top with Metroplex and Galaxy Prime. And Bill, I know that was kind of always the intent of Turnabout Snare, but now with Post Errata, are we finally seeing that, like, realized as it being an option for when the meta is favoring these larger characters?
Yeah, I'm very happy with where Turnabout Snare is right now. As far as, like, it's always going to be dependent upon the meta. If the meta gets taller, the smart players will start bringing in Turnabout Snare. And if it goes wider, then Turnabout Snare goes away. And I think that's good design.
Right. So
for sure.
That was a good point of bringing that up, Naga. I did not have that on my list. I would have not thought of that at all, but good call in bringing that up. Moving down the list, I said this and then Naga cut me off, but he cut me off for a good reason. Energon X. You're good. It's a good thing you did. Energon X. At 11 copies across 4 decks. Thoughts on this? I am actually thinking the stock on this is down a little bit. Like, I've maintained the opinion that this is, like, the best battle card in the game, but we may see that perch that it was holding slipping away before us, especially with the rise of, like, or, like, I'm not sure how to describe it, but, like, we're definitely seeing this thing not seeing nearly as much play as it once did, and I'm not sure exactly what the cause behind it is.
Yeah, I think this is, like, auto-include in almost every single blue deck that you could imagine, right? Like, Energon X is by far an insanely amazing card with a drawback that you can't play it on your first turn. Like, to be fair, with the amount of direct damage that floats around, the amount of AoE, I'm pretty sure this 3 copies were in Frank's aerial bot list, and the stratagem for In the Name of Slingshot. You know, you put damage on 4 of them, and then you kind of get around that effect. Like, you could go, if you're going second, you can have someone just throw on an Energon Axe and go in. You can actually get some high-value damage out. So I would agree. I don't think people are playing it as much considering how good the card is, but then it kind of does reflect a little bit of how much, like, blue we actually saw in the OY. So the more decks that are more blue, the more you'll see Energon X. But yeah, I think it's still, 11 out of 4. Someone didn't play their 3rd copy, so I would agree. I think it is a bit down there.
Right. And Bill, do you have any comments to add on this?
I think Energon X's stock will go up in Control now that Fusion Borer is gone.
Right.
Yeah, actually, very good point.
Yeah, because, Fusion Borer was just unquestionably better Energon Axe. +1 Pierce, sure, it's scrapped at the end of the turn, but, removal is still a thing that's floating around everywhere, so take that as you will. Moving down the line. Lion, wait and take the shot. Bill, you alluded to this earlier, or somebody alluded to this earlier with Metroplex, but, as an overall, we are now seeing these cards realized, in multiple events. We already saw them, we already kind of, how do I put this? Kind of basically, how much of an impact have they made on the meta beyond the original intent, or made an impact on the game as a whole, I should say, beyond the original intent of them being a Peace Through Tyranny and Sec Check replacement?
They've been universally embraced, which is pretty. It took me by surprise. I guess Naga, you probably speak to this a little bit. I've only heard of one person. I think in the last 6 or 7 months or so that it's been on our minds. I think I've only heard one person go, "I sure wish PTT and Sec Check were back."
Honestly,
is that your experience as well?
Yeah.
Yeah. Honestly, because when you think about it, E5 still had them in there, right? And then I can definitely say, without a doubt, having security checkpoint over Lion Wait, and it's gonna sound good, but it's bad. Security checkpoint early on the game when I was playing Fort Max absolutely destroyed my opponents, and then at that point it was very easy for me to win. Like, I play it, and the aggro team has no grenade launchers, and they can have fun trying to top deck one. Is pretty much the scenario it was in, right?
Right.
And then Fangry, to be completely honest, another big issue with the body characters is that PTT was there. you go, oh, you missed Fangry on 1, which apparently happens a lot in the server, because that's kind of what happens. You missed Fangry on 1, and I'm gonna PTT, have my Parsec, and still take my other turn. So it's like, yeah, like, normally when you would PTT before, even if you PTT Battle Masters, you would go, oh, now I get a strong weapon, or a strong upgrade. But you'd have to play it around the point of where you may only have one other character attack with, but when you actually have characters underneath on the heads, PTT was just basically free, because you just needed to make sure that you had one other character there. And then you still got 2 taps very easily. 2 attacks, not taps. So both of them leaving was amazing. Like, incredibly amazing. And we actually just saw more other cards being played. Like, in terms of battle cards that obviously you automatically include take the shot and lie in the wait because you want to use them in your respective decks. So I think some people may have not included them because they were playing more Pierce and didn't want them. That's fine. But in terms of if you had data for, say, how often you played PTT and Security Checkpoint over actual other cards that you had to really more think about putting in your deck when you're deck building, you would see Security Checkpoint and PTT pretty much just being like, okay, I'm going to keep this and not play this over my Supercharge. So them being gone actually shines the light on pretty much almost every other card you could physically put into your deck, because they are now just better, right? You don't have those 2 insane options that always go, I have Security Checkpoint on my hand, I'm going to play this over that, right? Because this is just always better, So the take the shot, lie in the wait being a little bit less in effect, but also actually being decent effects because they're on colors. Rolling actions are actually pretty good when they give tough 1 and bold 1, because you'll set them for a turn and then you have a slightly bigger swing the next one. It's good, right? And then you don't always play them. You don't always go, I have take the shot in my hand. You go, now kind of actually that green swap's looking pretty good, right? Mm-hmm. So overall, and like a mental state of thing and seeing everything else played, it's been actually a very nice domino effect in the health of the game, really.
Right. Okay, moving down the line, the last kind of thing I want to touch on here, Reprocess and Impetuous Stand. These are, without a doubt, the 2 best utility removals in the game. I personally think that Reprocess's stock is about to shoot up like crazy for a few reasons, and Impetuous, while admittedly it is in a bit of a weird spot, and Bill, you can probably touch on this, I feel like its stock might go down a little bit, kind of as an incidental thing that happens with Reprocess's stock going up, because there were several moments in my match versus Brett where I was wishing I could pick up my Impetuouses, and Reprocess would have done much more work in that situation. So I feel like with Galaxy Prime being a resurgent threat, players are going to realize the value of that green icon with Reprocess, and maybe Impetuous falls off to the wayside a little bit, but Bill, I know you could probably comment on Impetuous' weird
could I
a little bit more. Yes, what's up?
Could I throw in, you may actually see Disarm start going up as well, because when I spoke to Brett, one of his key points was, no one's been playing Galaxy Prime, why would people play Disarm? Right. There you go.
So that might go up as well, but Bill, the state of Impetuous Stand, I think you might be able to comment on this better than I can.
Oh, I agree about Reprocess. I think we're going to see a lot more incidental upgrade plays with Wastelands in general. Like, you see a lot more armor axes, lots of more Parma shields popping up, and it's just like, you might find yourself in situations where you're like, well, it's useful, but it's not terribly useful. Maybe it's more useful if I reprocess it and just get another one, just get another Parma shield next turn by jumping on Scrap Heap, right? So those sorts of plays probably be enabled a little bit more with Junkions. I always really enjoyed Reprocess. I think it's a fantastic sort of give and take card where there have been many opportunities where you could use on the opponent, but it's sort of like, oh, I'm also repairing him too. I think that's fantastic gameplay. Having to make those decision points, they're good. One thing I want to mention with Impetuous is that first off, Zero made the sort of big improvements on Teletrend 1, just providing us so much more fantastic data as to previous tournaments and what they've been playing, and all the analytics have been really impressive. Like, to your point that you made earlier about having so many more talking points, because there's just so much more data to read from the OI now, due to the fact that they added all these additional functions, right? And one of the things that I noticed was that they were now we're able to now get all-time analytics on cards being used, not only in Allied crossplay and also for all cards being used in the game, but for particular game scenes as well. We used to cover ATP. We had a couple events where we covered ATP, and I remember writing an article way back in the day about cards I liked from ATP. One of the cards that I was looking at when I was writing the article, but I didn't actually include in the article, were cards like Take by Surprise and Catch Off Guard. And basically these sort of cards that they're removal cards, but they, instead of just putting the cards in the upgrades in the scrap pile, they'd put them either on top or on bottom of the deck. And I was reading the new analytics coming from Zero, where I've kind of gone on a tirade several times just going, well, card diversity is really important. We want to make sure that there's a lot of choices, especially when it comes to things like removal. When Impetuous Stand was floating around originally with the green pip, and then later on without a green pip, but just like a white pip card that can fit into a lot of decks, I was really concerned about the fact that there's a lessening of diversity when it came to removal, and that a lot of these sort of built-in removal, anti-removal mechanics that have been built into community crossplay were kind of neutered by its dominance. Like, okay, well, all these creators are putting in conditional anti-scrap mechanics. All those are useless now because IS is in the game.
And you've mentioned this before, but that leads to an arms race situation where players or designers are going to start replacing when this is scrapped with when this leaves the battlefield, and that just causes a whole host of problems.
Plus, it doesn't fix the problem with the old cards that were built with anti-scrap mechanics. They're still useless. Maybe new cards come along that can accommodate Impetuous Stand, but all those old cards that were developed for community crossplay now, they're still useless unless they get a refactor, and that's just a can of worms that we'd like to avoid just by looking at Impetuous Stand. Back to the point about analytics coming from Zero. We didn't have this before when we were first talking about it, and there's like, well, we need more data. We can't define that this card is oppressive or broken until we get some events in our back pockets to show that it's like there's really no choice anymore, and removal IS is the one the way to go when it comes to removal. But now that we have all the historical data from all of ATP's historical play, guess which two cards are the most popular removal cards in their scene?
Let me think here. Vaporize and Ramming Speed.
No. It's Take by Surprise and Caught Off Guard. So they've introduced they basically have introduced a paradigm for removal where there's like you have no choice. You're losing it. You are losing your upgrade. You have no choice. And so I think the fact that those two mechanics were developed, in a very similar method to Impetuous Stand earlier than Impetuous Stand, and now we've seen the effects of it, I think worsens the case for IS in Allied crossplay. And so maybe there's a future for it somewhere, but it's probably not. It's probably not during Season 2, at least in the long run. Now that we actually have some data to pull off of for very similar cards.
Right, and I should comment on the fact that Impetuous in the Allied crossplay team has been put on a watch list for the first 3 encounters of Season 2, so we're going to keep an eye on it throughout that and react to the data as needed, and that may result in the card staying where it is, maybe getting another change, or possibly just getting outright banned. We will see what happens, but I do want to talk about, and this was alluded to earlier, we're going to transition here into kind of the BFB realm and kind of projecting a little bit as to what's going to happen with there, but there have been some cards floating around that Impetuous isn't necessarily going to be as good against. Like, we've seen Sideswipe decks do pretty well in early testing for BFB. We've seen Shard of the Divine Light be a bit of a problem, and this was something that I encountered against Scorp in Harmony 2, I believe it was. But with these, like, star cards or showing up for in a relevant capacity, how much of an impact will Impetuous have once those start showing up, and will that influence kind of the result of its watch period?
Well, I think one of the things that I pointed out when we were starting to talk about this was definitely the star cards, for instance. Obviously, it doesn't hit star cards. The Battle Masters coming through. There's a lot. There's, Sideswipe is definitely a good example. I think I brought this up as well. Shark's Megatron. How his stratagem currently works. You have to scrap green cards as well to obviously revive the mini guys, right? The little dudes. So Aspect of Laughter is actually going to be a great thing for him to use as a tool, right? So then that becomes a thing where you can't Impetuous stand that, and when you kill a shark on your turn, the other player goes, oh, well, I don't have to scrap my green card because I have this Aspect of Laughter that your Impetuous stands can't get rid of now, right? So you could probably actually see a leeway, and Impetuous might just become one of those cards where it's good, but it's good in certain phases of where the game becomes, right? So it's gonna be that little toss and turn, like that juggling thing that we talked about with Belligerence and Orange versus Pierce Devastator, right? You kind of play that, then when people play the counters, you do the other thing, and then that one comes back once those things sort of loop back round, and it will just be sort of that circle, and then it just becomes like you say, Hawk, just when people build their decks correctly, they'll start putting it in when it's needed again. I think that's where it might be with BFB in its current state.
Right. Okay. That definitely makes sense. Bill, you got anything to add on to that?
Yeah, as always, we'll be looking at usage percentages, and if it comes about that there's a lot of star card upgrades floating around, but IS is still floating around at a higher percentage than everything else, and it's sort of like, well, I guess it didn't make that much of a difference, right? And so, once again, diversity is the most important thing. The cards that creators make is also important. If we see the arms race starting to initiate, where people are starting to put a lot of, if the card leads the battlefield, it's like, hey, maybe you don't need to do that. Maybe we need to do something about IS. There's a lot of levers there, and lots of needles to keep an eye on there.
Right. So I alluded to Sideswipe being a thing, and in early testing, this actually has been a somewhat surprising deck that's actually done pretty well, and, like, we've seen Battle Masters do well in the past. I mean, Lionizer and Fire Drive were two of the most relevant characters during the Wizards era. Lionizer in various aggro teams, Fire Drive with Blaster, but with Sideswipe, are we going to see possibly a resurgence of Battle Masters? And if so, like, which ones are possibly going to pop up with Sideswipe there to support them?
I think Sideswipe with a stratagem is really good. I've definitely seen, obviously, the deck that I built that consists of all the Autobots, the Sideswipe with Vanguard, Lionizer, not Dazzle Strike, Vanguard, Lionizer, and Weaponizer 6-gun, which was very good. That's a very fun thing to play, where they all die and then they jump on their friend, and then when their friend dies, they jump on blood, etc., etc. But I think a very good deck to look at that actually highlights some of the really some of the old good cards that are there was Zero's Harmony Wastelands 2 event, the one that he used Spinister in it, with Caliburst and the Weaponizer Scorpulator from BFB as well.
I'm pulling that up right now.
That's it's actually really good. Like when you think about Spinister by itself, there's not really other characters that really help weaponizers or battle masters. Sorry, Spinister likes battle masters. Sorry, Sideswipe likes both.
Yeah.
So yeah, there was just like when you used to play Spinister, you go, well, this is my like big character at sort of an 11-star cost, and you go, now I just have to fill my team with guys that either won't work with Battle Masters so well, or I have to just fill them with Battle Masters, and then it doesn't really do a lot more. But now with Sideswipe's here, and he absolutely loves them, and even Weaponizers and Sculpulator being at a 4 cost, you can fit them all in there, and you have a 4-wide team there using Spinister, which actually is. It didn't. I don't think it won the event. I thought it did pretty well, and I think it's something that if Zero carried on with it and refined it, I know that he threw every single double black that he could find in there. But I mean, if you could tool it in many ways. You could go heavy orange, you could go heavy black like he did. But you could really optimize it, and I think that'd be really cool. Sideswipe has sort of brought back in the idea that, hey, maybe I want to pair this with Spinister, and maybe I want to try some, funky cool stuff,
Right.
So,
and Bill, like, decks that do this, that resurr or, like, bring, like, old cards back to the forefront, like, as a designer, like, when you see this kind of stuff happen, whether it's intentional or unintentional, kind of like, what is your thought, what are you thinking at that time, like, most of the time?
Oh, hey, look, more diversity. That's fantastic, right? Anything that gives people an excuse to pull cards out of their binder that they haven't played with in a long time. Spinister, I guarantee, was one of those cards. Some crazy person's going to try, right?
Try what you cut out there for a moment.
Some crazy person's going to try crosshairs, too,
oh, God.
Yeah, maybe even potentially look for the selectors.
I don't know who you're talking about, but anyway, so Abominus. I played this for, I believe it was Harmony 1, and he's received some significant changes going into 2.0.5, and he's definitely been toned back in power level. Like, he is no longer an absolute, like, he's no longer the consistent 10 bold 3 pierce 5 machine he once was, but he still definitely has some tricks up his sleeve. And, like, we have seen that in the modern day and age, combiners can still do some things. Like, Devastator's doing things, like, even though Frank got bounced pretty early on, his version of Superion was still pretty interesting. So, like, where does Abominus fit into things? And, like, not just as a combiner, but just as an overall strategy?
I actually really like Abominus's pieces. I think, Bill, we even played a game a while ago when I started toying with the fact of, I can't remember the characters. I didn't really play them that much until, say, me and you played. I played with them, Bill. But the counter effects of upgrades and the counter effects of the non-green, non-secret actions, those two characters are actually pretty cool. And I liked how they played. Like, if you look at most of the combiners, they have very generic-ish effects that don't really stand out. But Abominus is actually a combiner that goes, well, I actually am kind of cool too. Like, my individual pieces have some stuff. Like, we have a Sharknicon in there that you could arguably throw it in to other stuff. A Ripper Snapper with a very decent ability that did get changed because in Sharks it would be completely insane. But, the counter effects, very cool, and I love them. Especially one of them working with Crystal Power, the being 2 different upgrades for the requirements of having 2 in hand to bounce back, because it's not counter effect like it is in Magic and stuff. It's actually really cool, and that's a card that you don't really like. I mean, as you see Crystal Power in like a Sound Blaster, but where do you see Sound Blaster? Right. It's another thing that kind of brings up some cards that already pre-exist, and you can going, hey, this is actually going to be pretty good.
When Abominus's old version was floating around, it made Laser Scalpel playable, but now, like, we're seeing different cards show up with it, and Bill, like, again, this is, I'm assuming there was a little bit of that intent with Abominus just based on the way that he has been developed.
I mean, yeah, there's been a lot of balancing, and in the meantime, also, there's been, I'd say, a movement towards making cards a lot simpler, while providing similar effects, and sort of where Abominus is right now. Abominus is actually really, really influenced by the design of Monofiber. When Monofiber changed to leaders and specialists only, it took Abominus out of a lot of those decisions, as far as being able to play with that card, and so that was the cause of some of its refactors, since that wasn't a valid play for most of the Terracons anymore. But well, an opportunity lost for Abominus turns into an opportunity for other cards like Gyric, right?
Yeah.
And so and other Renaissance leaders like Peck. And so yeah, as far as Abominus is concerned, I'm definitely he's still combining into Abominus with a lot of health just because of how hunger his health totals work out. And the ability to protect him. I'm still feeling really good about Abominus's power levels, but I think that Harmony Wastelands 3 was going to hopefully set things straight as far as where he actually lies right now.
Right. Moving along, couple more things before we get to the last point I want to talk about in this section. Fusion Borer, it getting banned, and Mechastar coming in to replace it. I alluded to this earlier, but what impacts are we going to see going into Season 2 here overall with this replacement card showing up?
A lot, really. You won't see a grenade launcher that fits in a blue list. In very simple terms, right? Like, we touched on it before. When you... before I loop to that, I should probably explain there has been people that don't think this warrants anything, right? Like, you could say people see belligerence as more of a thing, like why why are you not dealing with that? People could see Magray as like, why have you not removed this? I'd say Bill would probably comment more on why Fusion Borer was hit a lot more, but that just like outclasses so many things. If you compare it to the comparisons between grenade launcher versus other weapons, like there is grenade launchers just a 4, right? But all the other weapons, you could be like, well, flamethrower sticks around. You can go like power punch is similar, but can be countered in different ways. But then again, you go to look at all the other weapons, and you go, well, these all have a different utility factor, right? Whereas with Fusion Borer, you got +3, so you're almost at grenade launcher, and then you get PS3, so you're guaranteed always 3 damage. You then go and look at every other PS option that you have here. You go Grav Inhibitor, which is kind of the same, but you're like, now I have +3. You like mentioned before, you look at it compared to Energon Axe. You go, well, if I'm versing in a control list, this is going to be way better. I get 1 more guaranteed damage, and my opponent's like Impetuous Stand or Reprocess isn't going to hit that character like it would with an Energon Axe. So I'm going to get more damage, and my opponent can't really do much about it, right? Like, they could secret action it, but I mean, plus I get the black icon in there. You kind of Uber through every other PS option that it was. Now, reducing it by 1 and 1 on both sides means it's actually like a debate, right? Like, do I keep Energon Axe on my character? Do I actually want to put the Mecha Star on there now? If my opponent's gonna get rid of it, or do I just save it for another character? Which you probably would now. Like, you don't want to overwrite a great card like Energon Axe anymore. So yeah.
And to your point about, like, why are we not hitting other cards instead, I want to comment on Magray specifically. The thing about Magray is it's still a good card, don't get me wrong. Like, it won me Game 2 against Frank during the OI. But at the same time, that card's power level is dropping to a point where it's becoming half a Photon Bomb because of the introduction of Quintessons and Junkions now into the game. Whereas with Fusion Borer, if you want to nerf that powers card kind of indirectly, you're also indirectly nerfing other weapons' power kind of as a result, so it really doesn't do anything at the end of the day. So kind of the only option for Fusion Boar is to take it out back and replace it with something else. And Bill, I'm assuming you kind of agree with that?
Oh yeah, totally. And plus the argument around like why is Bill doing this card rather than this card? Well, that's an argument that we never really, right? I mean, when we first started doing 1C stuff.
Time out. Say that again. You cut out.
Oh, sorry. That's sort of an argument that never ends, right? You know, when we first started talking about replacing PTT and SecCheck, once those were out, while we were debating removing those, there were people that were like, "Well, how come you're not looking at Fusion Boar? Or how come you're not looking at Aggro, right? Why are you looking at these two cards first?" When it comes down to it, we ranked the cards that we needed to look at, and we followed this order. We thought that Mission Briefing was worse than Fusion Boar in a lot of ways. That card draw always leads to more opportunity to win in a deck.
Yeah, and even then, there's been a bit of leapfrogging in terms of priority. Like, I'm pretty sure, like, Fusion Boar was on the list for a while, but then those Sideswipe decks showed up, and that, like, jumped Mission Briefing up to priority, because, we do not need decks that are capable of drawing 4 cards on the first turn.
Yes, yeah, and it was actively hindering design space by its very existence.
Absolutely.
So we wanted to make sure that it was not an issue.
Naga, good job on getting that fixed.
Yeah, it was not Sideswipe and its fault at all. It was more the card was there, and as we carried on, it's gonna be something that just comes up. Right. And it's gonna be like, I can't do this because this one card exists. And then if you make something even slightly lean towards wanting to have more battle masters and bringing them up, you go, aha, Mission Briefing. So
exactly, but back to the point at hand. Yeah,
you're never gonna win that argument. People are always going to be bringing up, why don't you look at this card? Why don't you look at that card? I'm like, well, I have to pick something, so this is the one I'm picking. And data makes a big difference, right? I mean, look at the list that thanks to Zero in his new game analytics that are on Teletran 1. There's definitely a number 2 card of all time. The number 2 card of all time is Fusion Boar.
Mm-hmm.
I am actually taking a look at this right now.
Number 1 card of all time is Grenade Launcher, and Grenade Launcher I feel is fine.
Yeah, I am looking at this right now. Most used battle cards overall in all players, 453 grenade launchers in 172 decks, 371 fusion boards in 152 decks.
Ooh.
And then bashing shields floating around, but that's a whole nother argument. So
that's a whole nother argument.
Yeah. Speaking of cards that have been ban-worthy, kind of. The 6 and 7 star Decepticon Titan Masters, Quake, Fangry, and Bull. Those are going to be released from Gareth Stein likely here soon. Where do they fit in going into BFB?
I have my own opinions of this, and that's me just holding my handcuffs and holding the cell door for them again, because as you know, as like a PTSD thing of what happened in Wave 5 of people figuring out that you just play these 3 with their respective health heads and then they just unbeatable in a word. But in terms
the health heads are no longer an option, so take that into account.
Yeah, exactly. They are perma-banned. The health heads are perma-banned. We're just waiting to put these on the list. No, I mean, in BFB, it's going to be actually quite a shift, right? It's we're releasing Bill, Bayformers is releasing a set that's the size of Wave 1, if bigger, I believe. There's more characters, right? And including Stratagems as well.
It's the biggest of all time.
It's the biggest, right? With key components into it, right? Like we have Junkions, we have another combiner in it, we have other key characters that are going to come down, like Sharktron, Megatron, for instance. We're going to have another Titan body, which I really like, Sentinel Prime coming in as well. So like there's not going to be lots of like niche characters as you would probably expect with throughout waves, and there's actually going to be some key things in here, like we talked about Sideswipe as well, right? So Fangry, Horrible, and Quake actually probably have competition coming into BFB for cards that you want to really play. Along on the side of You can't do what you want to do with them. Also, the one thing that was kind of leaving them open was the brutal conditioning being at 1 star. Now that's at 2 stars. The deck becomes awkward where it didn't have health heads, because you used to be able to do Parsec, a collar, and then you used to be able to do Doom Shot on Fangry still, and then you still have Beacon, and you can still trigger it with Horrible. But now that's not a thing, right? We're not in a world with that. So it really becomes really interesting, where the deck has actually been pulled back so much that you kind of can't really do the same thing. And they may become characters that are still, like we saw with Fangry, with Parsec, that's really good as a 7-star character. Like, it's better than Barrage, right? Or, ultimately better than Barrage, right? But you can still see different versions of characters coming in. You may actually have new 7 stars that you want in. Say, if you're playing a Junkion deck that is Bandit, which doesn't want orange icons. I got that right? Bandit? They
love orange icons.
They love, it's Drifter, that's the one. Fangry's not the best in that list, because you probably won't want to play orange icons, but, that's orange. I realise that point's kind of invalid, because why would you not play them in orange? But, there's other stars in BFB that I think will actually kind of, at least bare minimum, make them not see as much play as I think people want to explore BFB, but they may creep up. But it's at that point when they start creeping up, they just go back into Garrus 9, and then we eat the key.
Right.
Anyways, I threw up some marketing for 0.25, where, yes, Wastelands is the largest Transformers TCG wave of all time, by number.
This part is maybe going to make it into the video? I don't know. We'll see what happens. But while we're on the subject of Titan Masters, Bill, you got anything to say?
There's a lot of TBD there, right? We wanted to give it a shot. It's Harmony Wastelands 3 is the preseason. It doesn't actually count towards the upcoming tournament season 2, so why not have some fun? We're gonna throw them into the melee and see how they do. See if there's always there's a weird effect when it comes to like even waves that have been beta testing as long as Wastelands. When a new phase comes out, there's always that attraction to the new shiny, whatever's new.
And we saw that with Encounter 1 and the Forbidden Encounter to a lesser extent.
Yeah, to a certain degree. But it remains to be seen whether or not players look at the answers to cards in Wave 5, which were previously overpowered, and they just sort of go, I kind of want to just play with the new shiny. I don't care if Fangry beats me up, right?
Right.
Even though, there's some pretty easy answers there for, some of those oppressive. And I think that, honestly, I still think that Quake is going to be a thing. It could be that Quake goes immediately back onto Garrus 9 or goes onto the permanent ban list, but I do see Quake as a direct counter to Devastator. And people might have that in mind.
Right. So then, finally, the one last thing I want to talk about in terms of projecting from BFB, Junkions. This is the big thing in this set, not in terms of mechanics necessarily, because that's vehicles, but just kind of as, the headlining piece of the set. Junkions are definitely it. Where do they fit in with both of the ways they play? You have your control drifter decks, you have your hardline aggro bandit decks. Where do those fit in overall?
You gonna jump in there?
Oh yeah. Oh, I get to comment first. Yeah. To be fair, I played with Junkions probably not as much as other stuff, because there's lots of new shinies, right? Lots of new shinies in BFB. Honestly, it's so weird, and this is just gonna basically be sort of my reflection of and my experience playing it. I sat down for about an hour to 2 hours trying to figure out how these weird, people work in these decks, these Junkions, how they work. And then Bill and Veryl come in, sit down 5 minutes, build a Junkion deck, and I get my ass handed to me. Like, they're so weird, and it's really good, right? You've kind of, hit the nail in the coffin about what they do. Like, you've hit them spot on. It's amazing at how weird they are, and someone that I would like to say that I've built lots of decks and I know where things need to go, at how different the Junkions actually play than what normal Transformers are. And it's not a bad different, right? Like, we're talking about Bandit and Drifter really throwing things into the mix, and you immediately go like, oh, okay, that means I just have to play this one color, or I play this one color. But then you throw that in with the vehicle mechanics as well, touching on that slightly, and then all their battle cards together, and it's just like a weird pool of just weird stuff that happens that don't really happen in Transformers. So it will take some learning, and it will take like learning space, right? It's completely different to the judges. I think the judges were a little bit more, they were different as well. You wanted to not really battle with them as such, as you wanted to tap them to use their effects, right?
Right.
And I think Junkions have a lot more of a steeper a skill curve, or a deck building curve, and it's going to take some time for people to really get underneath Junkions and
Right.
master the right way that you want to play them.
Right, and Bill, we've talked about this a lot with Sharks, where it's like, it's a fairly straightforward deck to understand how it plays, but it's extremely difficult to actually play. I'm starting, based on what Naga said, I'm starting to get the feeling that Junkions are kind of that to the extreme, except it's more hard to understand and even harder to master. Do you think that's like an accurate description of how they play, and kind of what do you feel they're going to be able to do going into this next season?
I think as their design has evolved in the last a year and a half or so, I think the learning curve for Junkions in the beginning was extremely steep. Like,
oh yeah, absolutely.
You had to really like get into what each card does in every single interaction. They were built. The Junkion faction was built in a spreadsheet. No card that contributes to Junkion design ever existed on its own. It was always a cell. It was always a row
Right.
in a spreadsheet. Like, if something changed into one, that probably meant something else changed. I think in that sense, in the beginning, it sort of led to this like interdependency that made it really difficult for like the average card player to like look at one card and go, okay, I understand what that does, but there's so many other dependencies here that it's kind of hard to wrap your brain around. Like,
right.
you're gonna kind of go around in a circle, go like, well, in order for me to understand what this card does, I need to know what this other card does. Oh, now that I'm looking at this other card, I need to go look at this other card.
Right, and if I'm not mistaken, I was one of the first people in alpha testing to try to wrap my head around the Junkions, and like, I picked up on a couple of those dependencies, but nowhere near enough to actually understand how to play the damn thing. And as time went on, I was able to slowly explain some of this nonsense to other people, and then it's finally started to pick up in terms of how people were actually able to comprehend the deck, and now we're starting to see in beta testing people understand the deck a little bit more. It's nowhere near, like, optimal levels, and I don't think we'll ever reach that point with Junkions, if I'm being perfectly honest, because of just how many different moving parts you have going on.
There should be difficult decks. There should be difficult decks in a game to play, and I like difficult decks. At the same time, there's also road drones, where they play pretty straightforward. There's no bandit, there's no drifter. It's just this crazy dude that likes, drones.
Right, but even that it's like fits into the Junkion theme of it's just like, excuse me, I want to be doing what now? Like, the whole point of Roadmaster as a deck, you want to be giving your opponent cards. It's just like, what universe does that make sense that you want to be giving your opponent cards, but then you take one reading of Roadmaster and you're like, oh, so I'm just loading my opponent up so that way I can just steal everything later, and it's just like, okay, that makes sense. And that's one build.
That's one build. You can definitely do it without the card draw, but I think people had a lot of trouble around like, oh, Detritus wants you to hit him. In order to get, he doesn't have friends unless you hit him, right?
Right, and I definitely think that actually helped me going into testing Thunderguts Gilthor. Like, I played a couple matches with him earlier tonight, and kind of that experience for Roadmaster wanting one of the big like main pieces of the deck to get punched, or the main piece of the deck to get punched, definitely translated over well into kind of how Thunderguts plays, because Stockpile wants to do a very similar thing. He wants to get punched in the face, so that way A, his bot mode gets off, which by the way, if you haven't read that, it's basically Countdown on steroids, and B, you actually need him to get punched in order for, or it's one of the options to get lightning counters on Cherish This World or Perish in order to combine into Thunderguts. So even amongst the Junkions, like, there are some similarities between the different styles of deck that are available for them.
Yeah, and Stockpile still needs a lot of polish and testing, but he's definitely a glutton for punishment, and he wants to be the guy that takes the punch, so that maybe he takes half of that punch and throws it back in your face, which I think is a really good mechanic too.
Hey, we ain't kink shaming here. If he wants to do that, he's fine doing it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I had to get that joke in, but yeah, like, it's definitely going to be interesting. Like, I don't think that we're going to see a whole lot of Junkions, like, in Encounters 1 and 2. Maybe around Encounters 6 and 7, we start to see them crop up a little bit, once people have finally had time to sit down and just figure out what the hell these bastards do. So, early on, I would expect it to be a very similar meta to the OI, but then as we get later in the season, the Junkions start showing up.
I mean, there's already some really powerful Bandit decks that are floating around.
Yeah, like, Bandit is definitely the more powerful of the two mechanics. Like, I mean, they, like, let's see, what are their cards? Deceleration Laser is pretty good, as it acts as essentially kind of a mini Belligerence. Dare to be Stupid is one of the funniest cards in the game, bar none. Like, they have some incredible aggro tool. Wait, no. Does Dare to be Stupid work with... Yeah, Dare to be Stupid works with Bandit.
Yeah, it worked with Bandit.
Like,
and it's also hilarious when it backfires.
Oh my god, it's like, haha, I do 6 damage to you. Joke's on you, I have a Dare to be Oh wait, I'm taking 7 instead.
Oh wait, I'm holding a grenade launcher.
or the exact opposite, like, when it's just like, hey, okay, so Nancy is dead. Nope, takes 2 damage.
Yep.
That is absolutely glorious. And again, at its core, the Junkions are just meant to be absolutely wacky and just make you question every decision you have ever made. And you're just like, what am I doing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're a lot of fun. And Drifter did get a bit of a buff in the last round for 0.25, so, wouldn't count them out.
I will have to take a look at that, because I don't know exactly what you're alluding to, but I will deal with that on my own time. But I think that's really everything I wanted to talk about here, and we are almost 2 hours into this. Good God. Do any of you have any final points you want to bring up? Speak now, or
muted
hold your
again.
peace.
My God. No, I mean, the overall take back from this is, you can look at the OI for what do you want to play, but I mean, BFB is coming out, and, I wouldn't say a meta is solid. I think as we go into Season 2, after about Encounter 2, maybe even to Encounter 3, we might actually start seeing the meta start to settle a little bit, but there always will be people that try crazy shit. So,
yeah.
Yep.
I'm really looking forward to the mid-season, because we have surprises coming then.
And even though I have some inner knowledge of things, I have no idea what Bill is talking about. So, should be interesting to see what nonsense that Bill throws at us. But, the fact that he said sure makes me have some ideas, but I'm not going to say anything on camera, because that's a stupid decision. But, yeah, with that being said, that hopefully this provides you with a bit of insight on where the Allied crossplay meta is. It's going to be interesting to see how stuff pans out in Season 2. And with that being said, that will do it for this video. Hopefully you enjoyed what you saw here today. If you did, or rather heard here today, if you did, there's a little red button you can push down below to show that. And, of course, we will be bringing to you as much action as possible from not only the upcoming Harmony Wastelands 3, but also all the action of Tournament Season 2 over on the live channel, of which there is a link in the description. And if you have any other questions about the Allied Crossplay meta as it is right now, leave them down in the comments, and me and the rest of the Allied Crossplay crew are more than willing to answer anything that you might be able to throw at us. So, yeah, I think that's really everything, and yeah, that will do it for this video. Peace out, y'all.
Moo!